My name, as you all know, is Dina Perlman Eiffel, and I'm here to introduce D. Bruce McLendon, who is a former ARP employee and has generously donated his wing cabinet as we start to build our Ellen R. Perlman Foundation's first ARP 2500 system. So welcome, Bruce.
Thank you.
We are really grateful, and I think that I can echo many people, not just myself and the foundation, that we're all very excited to be able to have this to use, and our gratitude is boundless. All I can say is that. And I think that what is going to happen is we're going to be able to open up our doors to future artists to come in and use it and create some amazing music. But before we talk about the future, I'd like to talk about the past a little bit, and I'd like the audience to know a little bit more about you and how you came to work at ARP and the things you did there.
I've been in rock and roll band since age 13, which is junior high school. And many years later, as I was graduating from the World's Electronic Piano, I bumped into a guy at Kitts Music, Kitts, in the DC area. And there was a salesman there named Clark Ferguson,
Oh, yes.
who introduced me to this 2-manual Lowry organ with foot pedals, a foldable stand, a separate amplifier, and everything. It was quite the piece of equipment that really augmented our rock and roll band for many years. As all that evolved, eventually Kit Music called me and said, "Hey, we got something you might be interested in." He showed me a 2600. Well, I was just beyond words. And from Kit's Music, I ordered one. It took a couple of weeks to get there. And I dumped my savings account to buy the thing. I don't know, it was somewhere around $2,000, give or take a few hundred. And although it was something I wanted, I'm sure my parents were not accepting of that decision. And so I hid it in my next door neighbor's upstairs bedroom under the bed. For years, it was back and forth. And eventually, and I don't remember the circumstances, I eventually was able to bring it home and show them. And my brother, we were both still living at home at the time. That's how far back this goes. And he was excited as well. My father bought a TAC 4-track tape recorder, and we took very good use of that. And so off and on, I was in touch with Clark because he was also fooling around with the 2600 at his place over in the Eastern Shore. I forget the exact name of the city. And so I went over there to spend more time with him, and he showed me some incredible things. He only had 2 patch cords for the 2600, and he's able to produce stereo, harpsichord on one side, a flute or something else on the other. And I was just, again, mouth dropping to the floor. So from that point forward, as I found out from him staying in communication, ARP had contacted him, my understanding, and he ended up being a service manager. As the sales team was being assembled and developed, Clark put in a good word for me, and I sent you that piece of paper. It's a receipt from some part of the University of Maryland on the Eastern Shore, sent out a bid to purchase a synthesizer. And so I submitted a reply, and interestingly enough, the submitters were granted access to go to the bidding award at the school. So I drove about 2 hours over to that University of Maryland location, and per their requirements, gave them a demo and everything. And I was the only one who showed up, and they were pleased, and they made the purchase. So that was my first ARP 2600 sale. And I was quite ecstatic. By the time I got my commission, which was roughly $800, at that time, Clark said, stand by for a call from ARP. They're hiring salespeople. It was only a matter of weeks, if then. And then they said, well, you're going out to San Francisco to meet Dan Hakala, and he's going to introduce you to the ARP technology and some customers, and you're going to make a living being a synthesizer salesman. So that $800 bought me a Datsun B210 in bright 2500 orange, got me around, and with Dan's guidance, and found a nice apartment in Foster City for $150 a month. This is back in 1973. And it was all from there. It seemed like every 6 to 8, maybe 10 months, ARP decided to move me around the country. So the one piece of my life for about, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years, I was going from city to city, being an ARP salesman, a regional district, whatever they called it. And eventually I was pulled in-house to help Ron Fennessy manage the whole thing, along with he and a guy named Hal Boyer, who was good at marketing. And he came from one of the keyboard sales stores in Pennsylvania, as did Ron. So that's what got me in there. And then when I found out a 2500 existed, because all I knew my world was 2600, I said, I've got to have one of these. And again, seeing because I was now moved up to Massachusetts, seeing one hands-on firsthand and having a little bit of playtime, I started saving my money. And about once a month, I could afford a new module for my 2500. So my first purchase was a 2500 with a power supply.
All of
And
this,
then added a module from there on out. And through Roger Powell and Mark Stiles, I got more into the whole music development, what electronic music was, how to express myself creatively. And it was just, fantastic every day to have access to that kind of equipment, and to be able to produce music, and then of course go on the road and sell the virtues of electronic music.
were you part of the Boston School of Electronic Music with Jim Mitchmerheisen?
Part of what Dave Fredericks insisted is we spend a week with Jim Mitchmerheisen at the Boston School of Electronic Music to learn things about music and acoustics and sound and frequency and vibration and all this stuff. We all got a copy of the Hal Leonard publication.
So you were really there in what we would call the heyday, when things were really exciting.
All the NAMM jams, all the conferences, the educational things. In fact, I sent you a copy of a badge I wore to some music event.
Yeah.
It was a big deal. And again, that was just more eye-opening, and just to be immersed in so many different avenues of music, creativity. It was just because I'd started music. My parents made sure my brother and I got into music when we were in our early teens. And I'm glad they did. It's the one gift that just can't be exchanged for anything else.
This is one of the things that I'm hoping, we are sharing with future generations, is access to instruments, and to encourage that kind of well-roundedness, and I think that synthesizers are an amazing combination of technology and art, and it's enabled people to do things that they couldn't do before with traditional instruments. A lot of people found that their world expanded, and as a rock musician, I'm imagining that was definitely something for you, that it expanded your world tremendously. Any interesting ARP stories that you'd like to share? Maybe one?
Wow, it's a lot of years. I guess the most important one was that through Mike Brigida and Tom Piggott, right? We learned, or those 7 salesmen, including myself, was that, and this is the big thing that has changed, the synthesizer produced electronic sounds that could be manipulated beyond measure to imitate and sometimes replicate or duplicate the actual physical instrument, but done electronically. The secret to making that happen, and Dave Fredericks kind of started us off with that you have to play the keyboard as if, with the intonation, as if it were the instrument. So the way you physically tapped the keys, moved the keys, played the notes, the way that you would have to get something to mimic not only the sound, but the way an actual performer of that instrument would have to make the sound on that instrument. So the keyboard technique became very important to help sell the instrument, to say, oh, you want a flute, you want a violin, you want a bass, you got to think how that performer would perform, the kinds of notes, the trills, the pieces of music that make the instrument stand out. And if you just play the keyboard like an organ, it's not going to have the same effect. Those two major artists at the time that kept the keyboard technique, as it were, to literally experiment with sonic textures, Wendy Carlos and Tomita. And Tomita's album, I still have somewhere, he did something that no one else had done at the time, that at the tail end of a lot of notes, the pitch bend would go up instead of down. And it was very uplifting, very positive feeling type music. And so just the experimental side, the people who would use the synthesizer for its electronic base and not try to replicate an instrument, their creativity was more expressive and more expansive because they just said, hey, I'm in here to learn how to make different sounds and I want to express them using the keyboard.
So in other words, not just replicating instruments, traditional instruments that have been around for many centuries, but creating completely new sounds. So there's an expanding on the palette, so to speak.
Of course, some of that experiment was the Edgar Winter hit Frankenstein. Again, electronic sounds, Emerson, Lake and Palmer. They weren't trying to do flutes, oboes, French horns, the rest of it. They wanted electronic music for its own sake to be totally expressive and unbounded. And they really opened up the world to a lot of people to say, look at all you can do. There is no limit.
Is there anything that you would like to say to some of the people that will be enjoying this instrument in the future? Any tips, any tricks, any advice?
Take your time. One of the pieces of documentation I sent, and I think Margaret Shepard did the artwork on this. It was a black and white drawing of the 2500 wing cabinet with all the matrix switches and connection lines. So as the patch book came out for the ARC 2600, how would you document all your settings on a 2500? Well, she came up with this template, which showed the position of the knobs and where the patch cords were placed to go out back to the 2600 for the most part. So advice-wise, document what you've done because that will certainly be a lot better than your brain memory. You have to experiment. Don't just let go of any constraints or limits you think might exist. Well, the instrument can't do this or can't do that. That's not true. It took me, I guess, a year to be fully appreciative of everything that could be done, all the ways that things can be connected, interconnected, control each other, and how you interact with that. And again, it's just the unlimited expression that's now possible. And I'm happy to see that the 2500 I used for many years and actually published a song for a theater group in Washington, D.C. early on. It's going to get a new life. It's going to get new exposure to new people and to an area of electronic music that is just doesn't exist today.
If you there's a greater understanding of making stuff, whether it's audio or visual, I think, when you're using the original tools and then are able to augment or some such with the virtual tools. So
yes, having the background in the hardware and knowing how sound was produced and controlled and expressed with your emotions, I think makes it moving to the software version a different experience because now you can relate, you can connect things in your brain between what you did physically and what you're doing in front of the computer screen. Granted, you still have a MIDI keyboard connected to your computer to do the software version, but so much of this, they've got all the flutes, flugelhorns, drums, including some synthesizer sounds, pre-recorded or pre-created in these software modules. And that's certainly, as you say, something worthy of expression. But to have the background in the real startup days is just, there's no comparison. And I'm happy to know that you're carrying that on and making sure that path exists.
On a side note, it's such an interesting sensory experience, like with the 2600 and the reverb, you can, you actually feel the sound waves. And I think they also have kind of become more than the idea of a machine. They're instruments like a violin, like a piano because they're, you know, they're the physical entity. The only difference is you plug it in, but it's they're real sound waves coming out. It's not digital emulations. And finally, one of the things that I've noticed, and I'd love to see if you think of this, is having a modular or semi-modular available to you rather than instruments with presets, which again, there's nothing wrong with. They're especially valuable for, I think, for performance, for, you know, live performance, but you discover sounds that by accident. Presets, there's not a lot of room for discovery, but modulars, you get to discover, you get to understand adding this and subtracting that is going to make a different sound or find something by accident. Very
That's an excellent point for exactly that reason. And it was the whole brains behind the 2600, along with your dad and the other fellow, I guess a couple guys who actually figured out how they were going to do the front panel. And it's exactly for those reasons. The discovery comes from the interaction. With today's software, yeah, you can change the filtering, you can add and subtract harmonics and all those things, but it's not the same thing as grabbing a knob or a dial or a slider and saying, gee, I wonder what this does. And then you find out this is what I was looking for. That flexibility, the creativity is expressing yourself with that discovery.
Thank you so much for your time. And again, we are all very grateful, and we really hope that you come to Boston at some point and visit and take part in this.
You're welcome.